Good evening. Good evening, good afternoon. Given our various I'll just say hello. So I would like to bring on and introduce our collection of scholars, our collection of directors and researchers, individuals who have been selected, hand-selected to bring to us and to foreground for us a conversation about race, about the dual pandemics, racism, COVID-19, and to really bring perspective, not only for us writ large, but for the HBCU community in particular. So with that said, I want to briefly introduce our panelists this evening. We have Dr. Cynthia Spence, Associate Professor of Sociology, Director of the Social Justice Program, Director of UNCF Mellon Programs at Spelman College. We have Dr. Camille McHale, Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at the University of the Virgin Islands. We have Dr. Pamela Obiaman, Dean in the Roy G. Perry College of Engineering at Prairie View A&M University. And we have Dr. Brian Marks. He is founder and Chief Equity Officer at the Institute on Race and Equity at Morehouse College. And I am Fred Bonner, Professor, Endowed Chair, and Director of the Mach 3 Center, Minority Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability Center at Prairie View A&M University. And we have our wonderful moderator who will introduce himself, Brother Jamal Watson.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bonner, for having us and convening us here today to talk about all of these really important issues. And of course, we are looking forward to having Reverend Sharpton also engage with us in this very important conversation in just a few minutes. He's on MSNBC, but is making his way to us. So we're excited about that as well.
Excellent.
So Dr. Bonner, did you want to also talk a little bit about, again, the format for today?
Sure. So our format today, we're going to have an engaged discussion between you and Reverend Sharpton that is going to set the stage. And I see your conversation with Reverend Sharpton as an entry point, a gateway to a conversation that will be engaged in with and among our panelists. And each one of our panelists brings a unique perspective, the perspective of faculty, the perspective of foundation directors, the perspective of scholar practitioners, practitioner scholars. And the main reason that we divined this particular convening is that we wanted to hear from the authentic voices of those who are in and who are connected to the HBCU context. And what these dual pandemics, the pandemic of race and the pandemic of COVID-19, what it meant from us, from our various perspectives and from our various positionalities.
Reverend Sharpton, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry to be late. I was doing an interview on MSNBC about the latest revelations on the president.
Thank you so much for joining us, because this is really important conversation that I know that you wanted to be a part of. So I'll just jump right in. You've really been fighting, and you and I have talked about this, you've been fighting social justice issues for nearly 50 years or more, particularly around police brutality cases. And I'm wondering, when we think about the George Floyd case, it seems like for many, things have shifted and it feels different in their response to what happened. And I was wondering, do you get a sense that things are turning the corner and that they feel different in some ways?
Well, I think that there is a viable and vibrant movement, and we have the opportunity to turn that movement into some real tangible legislation and other things that we have desired for many years. We've been successful in some places to get racial profiling laws. I'm talking about some of the things National Action Network's been involved in things like stopping, frisk. But now it's time to get national legislation. It's not enough that we got the Eric Garner law in New York. and the racial profiling law that we dealt with in California with Stephon Clark. We need national legislation. And this way we have all 50 states covered. And we have the opportunity to do that now because of the drive and momentum and the moment that has come out of the George Floyd movement. I think, though, that it also must deal with all across the board the social landscape, which is why I think it's so important that we have the HBCU leadership on tonight, because the institutions that sustain us and that have been the foundation and undergird of our communities, particularly that those in our communities that have aspired academically and wanted to build and be something but remain culturally connected, they must be supported, they must be stabilized, and they must be properly financed. So I think this is an opportunity to deal with all of that if we can all come together and use this moment to serve various parts of the needs of our communities.
And we, of course, know that during the civil rights movement, you and I have talked about this, that HBCUs were really fertile ground for a lot of the activism, whether it was Reverend Jackson at North Carolina A&T and other activists, Calvin Morris at Lincoln University. That really was the space for a lot of the activism to take place in the 60s. So it makes sense that our institutions would continue that today, right?
Exactly right. And I am very concerned that if we don't keep that out front of what those institutions developed, and it became in many ways the training ground for our political leadership, our economic leadership, our civil rights leadership, our cultural leadership. And if we do not keep that fertile ground there, what happens that makes a flower or a plant or a tree grow is the ground that it's in. If you don't have fertile ground that is nurturing the fertile ground, it will not grow. The flower won't grow. HBCUs has been the fertile ground that has produced the leadership of Black America for the last century. And if they're dried up, if there's no water, there's no irrigation for them, it's going to dry up the leadership across the board in our community. And we must make that part of the agenda.
Yeah, and as you know, many HBCUs have been struggling because not only have they been addressing this issue of systemic racism, but also this COVID-19 pandemic, which I know you've been front and center, and National Action Network has been front and center in calling attention to that. So I was wondering if you could also speak to the COVID-19 challenges as well.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating for many HBCUs. It affects their ability to raise money. It affects the ability for tuition. It affects their ability to even hold classes. And you have to remember that we are in our community disproportionately where we don't have the broadband. So to tell some students, well, just go and do your education virtually, well, that's good if you are in areas that you don't have the challenge that we have in some areas. All of that affects the HBCUs. We got commitments, we received commitments of funding from this administration, all of which did not come through, and now it is needed even more. So I think that it is really a dire time for a lot of our HBCUs that we need to rally around them. And we're going to be doing that at the march on August 28th. Part of what we're going to raise is the HBCUs.
Yeah, let's talk about that march on August 28th, because again, many of us who watched the memorial or the funeral for George Floyd, we remember where you said George Floyd should not be among the deceased. He did not die of common health conditions. He died of a common American criminal justice malfunction. It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knees off our necks. And again, I know that was the rallying call for this march. Tell us about the march and how HBCUs, administrators, faculty, students can participate and get involved.
Well, the march is on the exact date that the March on Washington in 1963 was held, August 28th. It'll be 57 years later. That's the march where Martin Luther King made that address, I Have a Dream, that has gone down in history as one of the great speeches of all times. His son, Martin Luther King III, and I have called this march. It will be at the same location in Washington, Lincoln Memorial, where Dr. King spoke those words to say that we want to see the George Floyd police justice bill that has passed the House of Representatives to pass the Senate. The Senate won't even take it up. It will deal with policing. We want to deal with voting rights to make sure we are seeing around the country that they are purging voters off the rolls. They are changing voting locations. There are all kinds of shenanigans to bring our vote down. If we cannot participate in our exercising our right to vote, that affects HBCUs, that affects business, because we will have legislators in that decide what goes to these institutions and businesses. So everything stems from that. So we want people to come. We're going to be very conscious of COVID-19. People on the buses, if they choose to get on one of the buses to come, that we have must wear masks. It must be one on a row. At the rally, we're going to make everyone wear a mask. If you don't have one, we'll give them one. We have thousands, tens of thousands available, and we're going to distance. So we're coming, and I might add, there have been protests every day around the country, and any number of studies said COVID-19 did not increase at these rallies because they were very conscious. We're going to do that August 28th. But it's important for the U.S. Senate and the world to see numbers there demanding that demonstration turn to legislation. And there's been no real focus on having national legislation by challenging directly with our bodies, the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives.
And the urgency is really now. I mean, there is
the urgency is right now. If you don't do it now, this moment will pass, and what would and should and could have been a lasting movement will only have been a fleeting moment. This is not a summer exercise. This is about real change.
Yeah. Reverend Sharpton, talk to me about what academicians, we have scholars here from HBCUs, how can they better partner with civil rights organizations and leaders like yourself in helping to put forth this message, whether through their scholarship, how can they get more involved?
I think their scholarship, their information is important because they provide the content and the continuity of struggle. If you look at our struggle, we've been here 401 years. Things that we're dealing with now are things that we have had a historic reference point in the past. They know that history. They know that analysis. They could save a lot of internal strife by saying, no, we were able for the 60s, we romanticized the 60s. Well, we had Dr. King and Dorothy Height and Malcolm X and Adam Clayton Powell and Thurgood Marshall all at the same time. But a lot of us don't know our history. Our scholars can say there's always been different lanes in our community, but it was always one highway. They also are the ones that know how to structure and give a scientific analysis to what is going on in terms of the social landscape of the country. So it is not just a matter of sloganeering, but to give the substance of the actual data on how we are systematically rendered to less of an educational opportunity, economic opportunity. I have people call my radio show, Dr. Watson, saying, well, no, I'm not into voting. I want to build Black businesses. Well, I said, well, how are you going to get the business zoned? You've got to deal with the local city council or board of aldermen. How are you going to get a business loan if we are not given business loans by certain financial institutions? All of that, scholars can put the framework together and make sure that we are speaking from a basis of intelligent and strategic thinking and not just emotions. Emotions are to drive our intellect, not replace it.
We're going to bring on our scholars, and Reverend, I know that you're tight on your schedule, so we'll let you go shortly, but I want to bring in our scholars because I know that they want to engage with you for a few minutes as well. But before I get to that question, can you just give us an update on what's going on with the Breonna Taylor case in Louisville, because I know that has many people concerned?
Well, one of the things that we have talked about is there's been continual protest. Our chapter there has been involved. Our board member there, Reverend Malone of Canaan, they're now calling on the investigation of the mayor's office and their investigation on it. And we are supporting that wholeheartedly. and we expect members of her family to be with Breonna Taylor's family to be with us in Washington. There cannot be any rest. Not only do we need the local Breonna law that they passed, we need a law federal against the no-knock laws, and we need a serious outside investigation that you do not depend on the local Kentucky officials for.
Yeah. I want to go to Dr. Brian Marks from Morehouse College, because you're involved in a very interesting training project with the police, and I was wondering if you could share that a little bit.
Sure. Good to see you, Reverend Sharpton, Bryant Marks, Morehouse College.
Good to see you.
All right. Yes, indeed. So I'm also Chief Equity Officer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. And so over the last 3.5, 4 years, we provided anti-bias or implicit bias training to over 30,000 police officers across the country, including the entire Los Angeles Police Department, Phoenix PD, Seattle PD, King County. And so this work has been arduous, labor of love, but we think we're able to make some differences in terms of opening up the minds of law enforcement officers. It's not perfect, and it's an ongoing process and a conversation, but we're trying to do our part. And so as this work is going on across the country, I guess my question for you, Reverend Sharpton, when you enter a situation, whether it's Minneapolis or in Atlanta, where I am now, and you have a conversations with local law enforcement or other partners, and they bring up this notion of anti-bias training and racial equity training for law enforcement. How does that work in terms of holding them accountable for having that sort of training and getting a sense of how effective it might be? Because there's a lot of people in this space, but my concern as a social scientist is, are they having effective types of trainings?
Well, I think that the effective type of training is to really make sure that they are sensitive to the people they're serving. One of the reasons that we've always advocated, Doctor, a residency law is it works better when people in law enforcement are working in areas that they live, at least in that city, because they're familiar with the environment, they're familiar with the culture, they're familiar with the interaction, and it leads toward community policing what works. I think the other thing, though, is you must have laws. They must understand that accountability is not a preference, it is the law, that they will be judged by what they do. So training was not the problem that a guy would put his knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It was that he felt he could get away with doing it, that he would not be penalized, that he was empowered to do whatever he wants to do. So at one level, the training is good, the training is needed, but you need people that have a core sensitivity and a core beliefs that they're to serve the public there, and that they're not dealing with some external people that I'm going to their hood to tame them and then escape back to somewhere else where I live, where my children and family are.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up. So I'm also on Mayor Bottom's use of force task force in Atlanta. If you had to identify one or two, if you could only pick one or two policies that police departments should implement right now, do you have a top one or two you recommend?
I would say that one, they should have a residency law, that all the policemen are to live in the city. And second, I think that they must have a community board that has power to suggest termination, suspension, that is independent of the police department. They must not feel that they only can investigate and determine the investigation for themselves.
All right.
Dr. Spence?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Sharpton. I really appreciate your recognition of the role of HBCUs and the important roles that we have always played, since the mid to late 1800s. When you talk about the value of our institutions and the scholarship that does in fact exist and is produced by very strong faculty members throughout the HBCU network, oftentimes those stories, however, don't rise to the level of national attention. We are seen as these very rich institutions that provide education to the masses. But oftentimes when scholars are sought out for commentary, they are not necessarily, they don't necessarily represent HBCUs. And so I'm thinking that greater visibility of the work that's being done at HBCUs might also increase the ability for others to see who we are, but also to provide funding to support us so that we are considered competitive institutions, competitive in terms of our endowments, and competitive in terms of the resources that we have. And so you recognize the scholarship at our institutions, but we don't often see ourselves on the national agenda. And so I'd just like you to comment on that.
I think that you're absolutely right. I think it must be on the national agenda. We cannot just put out different things and leave HBCUs out as some marginalized agenda that is we'll get to that later. I think that we clearly must make a national issue and national priority that this is the educational foundation of our community that has produced not only the Black leaders that Dr. Watson said, but our engineers, our scientists, our educators, our judges. And I think that must be upheld, because I think that too often we allow the public to feel that, oh, those were Black colleges that people went to because they couldn't get an Ivy League school. No, they cultivated what became the leadership of Black America across the board, from scientists to elected officials, and that's why they must be preserved.
Yes, two of the potential candidates for vice president are actually HBCU graduates.
Right.
Got a Howard graduate and a Spelman College graduate.
And they're both overly qualified.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Dr. Spence, Reverend Sharpton, is at Spelman.
Yes.
As well. Dr. McHale, did you have a question?
Sure, Reverend Sharpton. It's so great to be here with you. I'm Dr. McHale, and I'm at the University of the Virgin Islands. And so, what you spoke about with HBCUs and just the kind of environment that we provide for our students to really propel them to be leaders, or leaders of tomorrow, leaders in these important and consequential movements. I think we really feel the weight of that as we produce these future leaders. And so, just a personal question, and if you were giving advice to us as leaders at these HBCUs, to what more should we be providing to these students? So what are some of the tools that you have found just valuable for leading movements of consequence in this nation? And what can we as HBCUs do to make sure that our students leave not just with that book knowledge, but with these tools, these intangible tools, to go out there and make a difference?
I think that they need to understand and have the values that we are a people that has always been able to rise against adversity, and that we're expected to be excellent. I started preaching when I was a little boy, and it was because I was a member of a Black church. I was a junior usher. They had the junior usher board. And they came in and asked, when we were getting ready to have the junior usher board anniversary, what is it that y'all want to do? And when they got to me, I said I wanted to preach. And they let me preach. And I was 4 years old, but I got up and started preaching ever since. By the time I was 7, I was on the road. I thought about Doctor many years later. If they had told me no, that would have crushed my dreams. And I think that what we must let them know is that we are here to be the foundation for their dream. They must reach high. I never knew. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. When my father left, we were very in dire financial condition. My mother had to raise us on welfare, my sister and I, with food stamps. But I never knew I was underprivileged till I got to Brooklyn College. I went to sociology class, said we're gonna study the underprivileged. It's all right with me. Said we're gonna study people that come out of single parent homes on welfare, food stamps. I said, he's talking about me, because I was raised with the values that I was expected to be something and do something. My mother used to tell me, life is not about where you start, it's where you're headed. And that's what HBCUs has been, to put the values in them that the expectation is there. One of the reasons that I argue a lot with the culture that some in our community have used with various misogynist terms and other terms against us is that we've got to stop beating our kids' psyche down, that you ain't nothing but an N and she's a this or that. No, when we had less, we reached higher. And that is what we must instill in our people, to let your goals, your reach be a little beyond your grasp. Stretch out more, because there's more in you than you think.
Thank you. Dr. Obima?
Well, I'd like to know, how can engineers and scientists contribute to your movement? How do you see us contributing to the movement?
I think that given where we are in the technological era, we need the scientists and engineers to help us deal with the technology and how we break it down in our communities, how we deal with the high-tech industries, to dealing with broadband access racism, and to really deal with the fact that we're in a time now that you cannot survive without having basic understandings of the sciences that you all can provide for us. We could get by when I was growing up knowing a little bit about this or that. These young people cannot survive without technology. They cannot survive without a knowledge of these things. And if we do not provide that and get that information from you all and bring it down to where they can get it, we are cutting their legs off and then asking them to walk.
Yeah. Two more questions. One from Dr. Fred Bonner. Are you there, Dr. Bonner? Dr. Bonner? Oh, there we go.
I am. Okay, sorry about that. Reverend Sharpton, thank you for making this a special event and bringing the fire this time.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of, and hello from Prairie View A&M University, and just a couple of statements and that I want to frame as questions. I completed this article for Jamal for Diverse Issues about a month ago, less than a month ago. And it was like 7 propositions that I had related to dealing with these dual pandemics. And one of the first things that I said, the first proposition was, we must maintain dominion over our own narrative. And so often we see that the Black voice and the Black message is being co-opted by folks outside of the Black diaspora. And what I have said is that it's not about, we can have individuals outside of the Black diaspora having an opinion, but they should never have a dominion over our word. So I just wanted to know, what do you think about the importance of Black people, Black voices being heard and authentically representing who we are and what we do?
It's very important, because absent that, we allow others to frame who we are and tell us who we are rather than we telling them who we are. We can speak for ourselves. It's bad enough in a white supremacist state that you have the economics and the politics and others control others. It's worse when your psyche is even controlled by them. So I think that it is very important that we speak for ourselves, about ourselves, to ourselves.
Excellent, thank you.
I want to remind everyone again, August 28th, 2020, March on Washington. If you want more information, you can go to www.nationalactionnetwork.net, or they can call what number, Reverend Sharpton?
1-877-626-4651, 1-877-626-4651.
And we hope that you all will journey there for this historic event that will take place. Reverend Sharpton, thank you as always. It's great to see you. And
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. You know you got to run.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, panel. Thank you. That was very powerful. Any responses to what you heard today?
Hello. Hi.
Well, certainly, I think that it's so important for us to move beyond just, the platitudes that are, that are extended to HBCUs, because we've been in this business for, over 100 years. And we were actually called to this work because we had to make a way out of no way in many individuals' lives. And so I appreciate Reverend Sharpton talking about the value of our HBCUs, and it sounds like he is also going to advocate on our behalf, because we are, accustomed to crisis. we're always in a crisis mode. We were founded out of crisis moments in society. And, when they say that, the rest of the world gets a cold, Black folks get pneumonia. And I say HBCUs, we're in intensive care right now. And that's even the ones that are more resourced than others, because we cannot bring our students back, all of our students back. That is a major hit upon our incomes.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I hope that the nation will look at as we talk about these valuable resources. Well, how will the nation respond to make certain that we can continue to do the work that we're doing?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Any other reactions or comments?
Yeah, so I like the fact that he reminded us of what we are really poised to do, what we can do and what we can do well as HBCUs. We can do this because we have never seen our students as not having enough or not bringing enough to us. We don't think of our students as he says, disadvantaged in any way. They are our students and they're the students that we serve. And so I think that when we hit these types of crisis modes, I think it's, again, not to think of ourselves as being disadvantaged, but knowing that we can reach higher when we are lower than we used to be. And so it's almost like taking a lot of what we've been doing and what we've learned from ourselves and what we just do as a matter of course, and others should be learning from us right now how to deal with this. Because as Dr. Spence says, we know crisis. We deal with crisis all the time. We just don't call it a crisis. It's just life. And we get through this. So I think it is time, Dr. Bonner, for us to bring our voices, to speak our truth, to do our research and tell our stories so that others can learn from us, because I think we have a lot to say.
Yeah.
There was one thing I was wanting to say, and from what I've heard from Dr. Marks, Dr. Spence, from you, Dr. McHale, from Reverend Sharpton, one thing I think is going to be very, very important is for us to understand, how do you contextualize activism across the disciplines? And Dr. Obiaman, her question was, what does it mean? What do we do from the engineering perspective? I need to know from education, what should we do? Brother Marks from sociology with Dr. Spence. So what does it mean to contextualize activism across the disciplines? So what do I do as an educator, and what should we be doing in engineering?
And we need to be talking to each other as well, right? Having those conversations outside of our disciplines and across campuses and institutions, which is why, Dr. Bonner, I'm so glad that you have folks from as far away as the University of Virgin Islands, because it's really an international, right, discussion that we need to be having. It's a much broader conversation in many ways. So I think it's really important. So what I want
The
to
great thing about you, Dr. Watson, is that you're the epoxy that brings us and binds us all together. So, and it's really important. I mean, we can have all these different perspectives, but we need a bonding agent, and you have been such a strong advocate for us.
I appreciate that. So what I want to do is, if I can, transition a little bit and have each one of you talk a little bit about these pandemics that Dr. Bonner laid out in his intro, and how you all are grappling on the institutional level with some of these issues. So I want to start with you, Dr. Bonner.
For us, one of the things that we have seen, and I've seen this on a national scale, but also just with what I've seen at on a local scale, is that the pandemic of race has really heightened an awareness about the importance of HBCUs and about a place to have a safe space for identity to become manifest. So from my perspective and my background in training in higher ed administration and student affairs and college student development, is that I think that students are gravitating to HBCUs, one, because of the quality, two, because of the safe space, and three, because you want to be in a place where you can just flourish and have the opportunity just to do you, a place where you can experience all these, all your identity vectors without being encumbered by things like racism. So we know that HBCUs operate in a microcosm, but it is a nice thing to have a place and a space that you can go and you can just operationalize exactly who you are. You know, that kind of touches upon, I'm just finishing an edited volume with scholars who, African American, Asian American, LGBTQ scholars. And the focus of this volume is college student development theory, alternative frameworks. And the reason we came up with this book is because for those of us who've gone through higher administration programs and college student development theory courses, all of the theories, you know, good theories, but very, very white theories, theories that were normed on white populations, theories that really didn't have Black folks, brown folks, LGBTQ folks in mind. So this compendium actually brings a focus on theories, a very different take, an alternative theory. If you're dealing with Black students or Hispanic students, why do you have to go to Colbert? Is there another theory? There was an article years and years ago that really struck me that was kind of like my impetus for moving towards this book. These scholars use the Nguzu Saba as a foundational framework to look at Black student identity development theory. So what are some other theories coming from some of the other populations? What are some Native American theories or other approaches that we can use, but we never talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. So I think if anything, one of the things that has come out of this, these tragic events has been this push to say that individuals need to broaden their perspectives, right? They need to reach out and be more inclusive of other voices and other narratives as well. And Dr. Bonner, I think that's sort of what you're also talking about, the need to do that in scholarship. You know?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Smits.
Yes, thank you. And Dr. Bonner, I'm really looking forward to that volume because I would love to read what you all are sharing because it sounds very important. Well, you know, I'm coming to you with two different hats, from the hat of a faculty member at Spelman College and the director of the social justice program. We are, in fact, we do see this moment as a moment where HBCUs should, in fact, be the thought leaders, because we believe that we do, in fact, represent a particular kind of experience where we've always acknowledged systemic racism. You know, it's not, you know, revelatory to us that these things happen. They are tragic and they are harmful to our psyches. But we believe that HBCUs should in fact be the leaders. And so Spelman is even developing a series called Spelman Speaks. And the Spelman Speaks series will in fact engage in these conversations about systemic racism, about white supremacy, about the ways in which marginalized communities are in fact are disproportionately affected, not only from COVID-19, but also affected by systemic racism. We also have a freshman series, the Ida B. Wells Big Question series, where faculty members will be conducting seminars with the first year students that we allow to arrive on our campus. And these seminars will just dig very deep, but many of them will in fact be talking about COVID, you know, and what that means, but how COVID is just another epidemic or pandemic that we deal with as a Black community, but also as individuals who've been disproportionately affected by public health crises. And sometimes our bodies have not necessarily been valued in the same ways when public health crises impact us. And so Spelman is prepared to embrace our students, the ones that we're able to bring in. We will embrace them, and we will keep all of our upper division students online. But with my UNCF Mellon programs hat, I'm troubled. You know, I'm very much concerned about our institutions. I know what it means to lose tuition revenue. I know what it means, you know, when you lose room and board revenue. And so many of our institutions are tuition-driven institutions. They may not be able to come back from this hit unless we receive extra assistance. I'm also troubled by the fact, as director of the UNCF Mellon programs, we're in the business of producing PhDs. And of the 125 PhDs we produce, only about 5 have decided to return to HBCUs to teach. because they're told at their graduate schools that HBCUs are not the place for you to get your work done, that you will not be a productive scholar, that you will have heavy teaching loads. And so I believe that we must, in this moment, as we think about the richness of our institutions, we also need to think about how do we make our institutions capable and welcoming for young scholars, because we need them. We need them to inhabit our spaces. So I think that most of us will survive, but this actually may be a major blow to some of our institutions. And so I'm very much concerned.
Yeah, certainly reasons to be concerned. Dr. McHale?
Yeah. Yeah, so I really do want to thank you for having our voice at this forum. I think it's been really interesting so far. And I know that a lot of people are thinking, wow, University of Virgin Islands, that's an HBCU? Yes, we are. And I think it's good to be part of this because we actually bring a kind of a different sense to the conversation. We know our history. We know the history of the HBCUs, and as Reverend Al Sharpton spoke about, and also if you've read Jelani Faber's book about shelter in a time of storm, we know that our nation's Black colleges have a long history of providing the type of environment that expertly produce future activists in the civil rights and many human rights movements. So, as leaders in HBCUs, and now as the nation faces these two larger than life pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemic and pulling the mask off the racism that has so shaped the Black and Brown experience in this country, our questions to ourselves as HBCU leaders is, what are we going to do to make sure that we honor the rich legacy that has been passed down to us? This is a heavy kind of situation to be in, because we know we need to do something. So how might we make sure that those students, to the question that I asked the Reverend Al, how might we make sure that those students, any student that passed through our halls, the hallowed halls of the HBCUs, how can we make sure that they're prepared mentally, emotionally, and of course with the knowledge to make a difference in and for the lives of African Americans in this country? What is the content of, as is written about in Shelter in Time of Storm, our second curriculum, or as others might want to call it, the rest of the story? This is an important aspect of the HBCUs, that we not just nurture, but as Reverend Alice, like he was speaking my language, so aptly puts it, he calls it the fertile ground. We don't just nurture, but we plant and we feed and we give students what they need to matter in important and consequential national movements. That is, and whether you bring your STEM self or your social science self or your arts self, you bring that self along with other things that you gain at HBCUs. And we are the ones that have always provided this space, this safe and supportive space to test those theories for students, to hone those debate skills, and for them to build those communities to take on what those graduates will face when they leave our HBCUs. And so it's an especially important question for us here at the University of the Virgin Islands. We are an HBCU, very young one by HBCU standards. We were founded in 1962. And we're also unique as we're situated in a United States territory, where a majority of residents are Black or Afro-Caribbean. So the issue of race is a complicated one for us, right? Some might say the entire territory is a safe space. However, others might say it feels, though maybe not necessarily is, so safe that we can ignore what's happening daily to our African-American brothers and sisters on the mainland. But as we look at how the current movement is focused on dismantling institutional racism and dismantling the celebration of that part of this country's history, some might also say that the fact that we are a territory of the United States, unable to choose a president, is probably a deep example of that very construct of institutional racism. So our students are primarily from the territory of the United States Virgin Islands, though we have many from the surrounding Caribbean islands and some from the US mainland. And as is a legacy and current reality of many HBCUs, our graduates and HBCU graduates, we always say it, we're disproportionately, in a great way, represented in the count of those that receive graduate degrees in the US, especially in STEM, those African Americans that receive those degrees, but also among other disciplines. And so as a primarily undergraduate institution, we know that many of our graduates will leave these shores to pursue more education or even job opportunities. And for many years, we ask our graduates, well, what happens when you leave? And we know that they are great in the classroom, but many of them speak about being victims of, as we all come to call it, driving while Black or walking while Black or bird watching while Black, and being pulled over for no reason. And so for many of our graduates, this is the first time that they've had to deal with this situation. And having spent so much of their lives here, they may not have heard the stories of what to do, what to expect, how to behave when pulled over. And how do we prepare them for this? What can our HBCU here do? I feel we've often ignored addressing this head on for too long. And what the current movement has taught us here at the University of Virgin Islands is that we can no longer pretend that we live in a bubble. First, we cannot pretend that book knowledge without that second curriculum is enough. What this current movement has started here at UVI is a series of conversations, a series of important, open, honest, sometimes uncomfortable conversations with the entire university community and with the various segments at a time, sometimes faculty at a time, might be students in particular areas. And what we hear is that some of our students are wary of going to the US. They're wary of going to the US for the reasons that we have these protests in the US. And what we also know is that some of our students are the very ones organizing our Black Lives Matter movements and Black Lives Matter demonstrations here in the Virgin Islands. So we need to be able to address both those populations of students, and we need to create this space for debate. We need to create the type of mentors that encourage students to grow in their thinking about these issues. And we need to challenge the students to grow, to challenge what appears to be just the way things are. And I think that's what is happening. I agree with all that's being said about the COVID epidemic and what that means to HBCUs. And I think if you ask the students what they're most worried about now is how do we come back next semester? But I know as leaders, we know that we need to prepare them for not how to come back next semester, but how to leave here and make a difference.
Well said, well said. Thank you. Dr. Obima.
So I'm going to share with you my perspective on how my role as a dean had to adapt so that we could navigate the pandemic. So basically, my role as the dean is to be the academic leader of the college, as well as ensure that our students have a very high quality educational experience. So in March, when the pandemic hit, we had to quickly move online. And in some of the issues that we were faced with were our faculty. Our faculty were not prepared to teach online. And within a week, we had to train our faculty to teach classes remotely. Some of the other issues that we ran into was that about 15% of our students did not have access to technology. So we quickly had to find funds and try to solve that issue, and we were able to do that. In the end, we found out about 1,000 of our students felt that they wanted to remain on campus because they felt that campus provided a better environment than being at home. So we had to deal with trying to make provisions for those students as well. But then we also had to get creative and make sure that our students could continue with work study in their student hourly jobs. So we had to create ways where our students could work remotely. They can conduct research, they could even do tutoring and some of the basic jobs at a remote location. As we plan for reopening this fall, we've decided to try to move our classes to hybrid and online. About 65% of our classes will be hybrid and online. We also reconfiguring our classrooms and setting them up for social distancing. We're enforcing wearing the mask, and we've prepared places for our students to be isolated in case they come in contact with people who have the COVID virus. And we've decided that after Thanksgiving, we'll end our face-to-face instruction and go to 100% online until the end of the semester. We're having to anticipate that when our students come back in the fall, that they're going to have both physical and mental health issues. So the university has invested funds into telemedicine, into mental health services, and using some of the funds that we received from the Federal CARES Act. Also, to help our students deal with the systemic racism, and we're requiring all of the freshmen at our university to take a course in the history of race and class in the US. We felt that our students would better understand what's happening in terms of systemic racism. In addition to that, our university is creating a platform for our students to discuss injustice. The way we're establishing a center of race and justice on the campus. But of course, when we come back in the fall, those are our plans. But you know, the best plans don't always work out. So we're prepared to move remotely, online. We have our faculty currently this summer. They're 100% of our faculty are receiving training and becoming certified so that they can teach classes online in case we have an explosion of the COVID pandemic. In addition to that, we're collaborating with some of our industry partners. We're collaborating them so that we can better teach remotely using cloud-based platforms so that our students can use any devices at any location and get access to all of our software and applications and be able to have a great learning experience. Of course, we have to create a plan for budget cuts. We're expecting budget cuts from the state. Due to the pandemic, we know that the state lost quite a bit of money, and we're expecting about a 5% reduction in state funds. So we're having to prepare and have plans to make up for that lost funding. In addition to that, right now, we've been projected that our enrollment is to increase. We have, but as of now, our students, right now, we're on track with the same amount of students that we had last year. But we're not sure because if we have an explosion with this pandemic, you know, things could change. So that would impact us from a budget perspective. So we're building a contingency plan for that as well. But as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the systemic injustice, we have improved in some areas. You know, whenever you're faced with challenges, in general, you tend to grow. So what we've done is we've learned to use technology much better than what we could do in the past. We're now using these platforms for advising our students remotely, which is really improving our communication. That was a major issue, especially with the teaching loads and the things that our faculty have. So now we can advise them pretty much at any time of day. In addition to that, we've been wanting to teach online courses for a very long time. So this pandemic have accelerated us to move into teaching online courses. We've learned to work efficiently to telework efficiently. Our offices will never be the same again, and so we've learned to navigate that. And now that because of all of the I guess the systemic racism, many of the companies are making commitments to donating to us. I know in particular to our engineering program. They're trying to develop stronger partnerships. They are trying to provide more intern opportunities for our students, and they are actually looking for opportunities to build. One of the biggest moves that we've made recently was Apple just contacted us, and they're trying to really support our college, as well as some of the other companies such as AT&T. So we feel like as an HBCU, although it's extremely challenging dealing with these pandemics, we're very resilient, and we can master it. We can maneuver through this. We can navigate this.
Thank you very much, Dean. Dr. Marks.
Yes, echoing a lot of what was already said in terms of the HBCU piece, the importance of our history and the role we played in advancing social justice for Black folks. I think just want to reiterate that. And in terms of Reverend Sharpton, I think to the earlier points he seems like he gets it on the role and contributions and values of HBCUs. So hopefully we'll hear that on the 28th on the big mic, the national platform. We'll get some HBCU shout outs. But in terms of my work and being based at Morehouse, so I'm a social psychologist by training, and at the traditional academic track. And then about a few years ago, 2013, I had an appointment with the Obama administration. So I was a commissioner, presidential advisor with the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. And so we advised President Obama in that regard from 2013 to the end of his administration. And in 2016, I was called up as a senior advisor with the White House Initiative on HBCUs. So I took leave from Morehouse, went up to DC, was housed at the US Department of Education, but also worked with the Department of Justice and the White House on a variety of projects, including My Brother's Keeper and the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Some key things I learned being up in DC with the Obama administration. It's very important to be in the room, right? There are often conversations going on across this country in various ways where not only are there no Black folks in the room, many times no HBCU representation in the room. So when I'm at the US Department of Education, for the majority of the time, outside when I was working with the HBCU office, those other meetings, I was the only HBCU representative there, right? Being in the room makes a difference. So part of what our HBCUs can do is encourage and facilitate opportunities for faculty to go off campus, take leave. I know sabbaticals will be a little tricky, get some grants, buy out some time, but we need to be present in these spaces, right? I mean, it's just being in the room and representing your perspective is incredibly important, okay? But in the work that we were doing at the White House, I'm a social psychologist, so I've been doing diversity, research, and training for over 20 years. And so I started doing work with My Brother's Keeper through the White House. I did some trainings for some national convenings they had. And then the DOJ said, well, we just finished the 21st Century Policing report. You want to do some implicit bias training? We got some police chiefs coming to the White House. So the White House had a series of trainings over 10 different dates, and I was the White House's official implicit bias trainer when it came to law enforcement. I trained over 2,400 police chiefs and command staff at the White House, all right? And what happened is those chiefs began to invite me out to the respective police departments to train their entire police forces. So I extended my leave from Morehouse. We started, a training institute, separate and apart from Morehouse, started a training institute. And I trained over 30,000 police officers in the last few years. When you added my team, that's another 10,000. Full circle. My goal was always to bring this back to Morehouse, right? Because I think we need to leverage our intellectual capital and our resources in a way that's not always done. And so the current president and provost got it, they understood, we had the conversation. So in terms of what we're doing, we literally, as of yesterday, just signed an agreement, a deal with Morehouse, where the National Training Institute of Race and Equity will be housed on Morehouse's campus. Morehouse has an equity position in the company. They get profit sharing, and they get a bigger profit piece for anything they refer. So if any of our 16,000 alumni, faculty, staff, trustees refer us for any diversity, implicit race equity training, Morehouse gets a piece of that, and money gets donated to the scholarship fund. So that's the way I'm looking at this. I'm like, we know we're vulnerable because we're tuition driven. So Dr. Spence talked about not having room and board money and how big a hit that takes. That makes us so vulnerable, right, to societal factors. And we have to come up with alternative streams of revenue. We have to be creative. When the George Floyd thing happened and all this, some people call it, reparations money, whatever you want to call it. But these big companies putting out all this money, hundreds of millions of dollars for racial equity and social justice and all that. And they're sending them to different places, some of which we know, so Urban League doing good work, NAACP and so forth. You know how much intellectual capital we have at HBCUs? I train police officers. Imagine if we had 100 cops come to Morehouse once a month to get training, and I have Morehouse students and AUC students, Spelman included, serve as co-facilitators, teaching them the history of race and racism in the United States, teaching them the history of how police and Black folks have interacted over our history. From them, suited and booted, articulate the whole thing. They don't even know our places exist.
In Atlanta, the backdrop of the civil rights movement as well.
Right. On our campus, over 2,000 Black males suited and booted, giving them this information. The only time they think over 2,000 Black males get together is because they're in prison, right? So we're going to show them, no, we got a place here, over 2,000 Black males getting together doing something constructive and productive. Just having them here on our campus in the Martin Luther King Jr. Chapel and the Ray Charles Performing Arts Center and the Howard Thurman Obelisk, just that in and of itself, the exposure begins to offset some of the negative perceptions they may have of our young people, right? So we need to leverage our campuses, our faculty, our intellectual capital, and our students in a way that's coordinated. There's no reason we shouldn't have got some of those, I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars have been going out. HBCUs, yes, Morehouse and some schools, got the money on the Netflix stuff. That's scholarship dollars. That's not programming dollars. That's not non-restricted, right? Which is what we need. So we're gonna have a real conversation. Let's have it. Let's hold these folks to the fire, right? So, and just to give you a sense, last piece, I don't want to go too long. I tend to do that, but I'm going to share my screen real quick just to give you all a sense of what we do, right? So let me show you this real quick. I do trainings all across the country, right? So I'm doing trainings in, let me see, can y'all see my screen? Is my screen up?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. All right. So we do this question where we ask, I'll just maximize this real quick. We ask our participants, when Americans think of young Black males, am I frozen? Don't tell me I'm frozen. Okay, here we go. When Americans think of young Black males, what words or phrases come to mind? We put this on the screen, it's a word cloud, and we have them respond. I'm talking about, we do this with cops, prosecutors, doctors, nurses, everybody across the country. We trained over 40, 50,000 people total in just the last 2 years. This is pretty typical. This next slide I'm about to show you, right? Okay, hold on. This is typical, right? Now, as you know, with a word cloud, the words that appear in the largest font size are the responses that were given most frequently. So the most popular answers, we've done this over 700 times across the country. Dangerous, thug, criminal, rapper, athlete, that sort of thing. You see this. This is typical. This was a group of public school teachers from the Northeast that gave these answers. Don't judge them. This is what everybody says. Why? When it comes to this notion of bias and perceptions and so forth, this stuff is in the air, right? The notions of young Black males, and we talk about other groups as well, but young Black males and people being able to provide these answers regarding this group, they don't have to believe it. That's not the point. The fact that any group we survey in the United States gives the same answers mean it's in them. They've been exposed to this group of these traits by living in society and having a brain. That's all it takes to have implicit bias, by the way, right? So once they have that, it's in all of us. I'm not shocked that I see bias in every aspect of life because all Americans are inhaling these associations day to day and can still be good people. So if we're going to have the conversation, we have the moral leverage to have this conversation in ways that other people just cannot, okay? And we just need to use that to our advantage and not be tuition driven. Think about this in an innovative space, network amongst ourselves as much as possible. But in this moment right now, we can make a huge contribution if we coordinate it appropriately.
Yeah, and to your point, and I think Dr. Spence, you also mentioned this, when you have these kinds of centers and this activity on campus, it naturally will draw national attention and put a spotlight on HBCUs, which becomes so important. I mean, Dr. Bonner, your center, which does important work there at Prairie View, and of course, I'm so excited to hear about this new center that is going to be established at Prairie View. I think that, HBCUs ought to be the focal point for this work. And oftentimes, it doesn't mean that PWIs can't do it either. But again, it's so important, I think, that our institutions are at the center and more importantly, that our leaders and scholars are in the room, as Dr. Marks pointed out. That becomes critically important. I'm curious to know what, some of the things I've been hearing is that, again, there is some concern for many Black students about attending predominantly white institutions, and that, in fact, enrollment at historically Black colleges and universities is beginning to surge. And there have been a number of reports about that. And I was wondering, are you all hearing that? And if so, well, what's your response and what do you make of that enrollment increase? Dr. Bowner?
Well, I think that I am hearing that, I am seeing that, and one of the things that I've tried to do, not only for students and a student perspective, I teach in the educational leadership doctoral program here at Prairie View, and what I have tried to do since I've been at Prairie View, and what I've tried to do through the Mach 3 Center in establishing this center, and actually that was the reason that I left Rutgers to come to Prairie View, was to establish the Mach 3 Center. And my goal and vision was always to have a research center in the HBCU context, because I've spent all my career, all my life working in these Research 1 predominantly white spaces, and having gotten full professor in 2 Research 1s, I was like, well, I want to take the knowledge and expertise that I've gained over the years and bring that to the HBCU environment, because the narrative about, all the great work has to go on in these white spaces absolutely is not true. So what I have seen and what I have tried to do, and with these increasing numbers, is to ensure that students of color, Black students in the HBCU context, have the resources, they have the opportunities, and they have the same privileges that students have in these predominantly white spaces. So the center that Dr. Simmons is creating, the center that we already have established, the Mach 3 Center, one of the things that I've tried to do, we just recently, and thanks to the vision of Dr. Simmons, she mentioned to me, she said, well, one of the things that grounds a center that it would be very, very important for you is to establish your own journal. So just recently, I established the Journal of Minority Achievement, Creativity, and Leadership with Penn State Press. So that is coming hot off the press. Our first issue will be out here in the next 3 weeks or so. On top of that, I established a book series with Routledge Press, Diverse Faculty in the Academy. And that, along with, there is a training session that I've been doing titled Framing and Maintaining a Research Agenda. And framing and maintaining is really, given all of my background and experiences working with tenure and promotion, particularly in the Research 1 environment, and really having gained a lot of information about just what folks are looking for, what tenure and promotion committees are looking for, and just what really goes into establishing a cogent research agenda. And many times in the HBCU context, we don't necessarily get that information, or not in the terms and packaging that we see sometimes in the predominantly white spaces. So Thurgood Marshall and the Center for Advancing Opportunity, they actually funded an initiative. And what I've been trying to do is to not only get out to PWIs, but to mainly get out to HBCUs and train faculty on how to frame and maintain a research agenda. For the past 2 summers, and I'm actually going to do it again this summer virtually, for the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, they have what's called QRSI, Qualitative Research Summer Intensive, and I present that for them. However, beyond QRSI, what I've tried to do is to go forth and do great things and bring this to HBCU campuses. I've actually gone to Norfolk State, Texas Southern. We're scheduled to go to Albany State. And it's an all-day training session on truly getting faculty in the research mindset, and not only the research mindset, but how do you put together a cogent tenure and promotion dossier? And to her credit, Dr. Obiaman had me to come and speak to the engineering faculty here at Prairie View. And my goal and my vision, and Dr. Sharpton mentioned, Reverend Sharpton mentioned how important it is for scholars and for academics to carry the water, to ensure that, we're progressing along the lines of scholarship and research. And I think that if we have training, we have opportunities for faculty to truly learn and engage in what it truly means to put together a research agenda, we can really, really corner the market and do some great things in the HBCU, continue to do even greater things in the HBCU space by way of research.
Yeah. No, yeah, go
In
ahead.
addition to that, I think we need more voices speaking on the great works that we're doing. For example, in our College of Engineering, we have a stellar artificial intelligence, machine learning engineering research center. And we produce algorithms faster than some of the algorithms at Stanford and MIT. We actually work with a team at MIT, but nobody really knows about the great works that we're doing. But so we need to be able to advertise ourselves a little better.
Oh,
If I might just,
yeah, I was just going to add quickly, and I'll go to you, Dr. McKell. I also think it means that media organizations have to be willing, as Dr. Smith said,
Yes.
to tell that story.
Yes.
We've got to push them
Yes.
to cover our institutions better.
Right.
I mean, you have diverse issues in higher education, which have been around, but we need more. We can't simply have mainstream publications writing about Black folks during the crisis. We need them to cover all of the things that are happening. And so I always tell people you need to push those trade publications who claim to cover higher education, who's not doing a very good job at it. We need to push them a little harder to do a better job. Dr. McKell?
yeah, I just wanted to say a few, you know, as with everyone here and probably everyone at HBCUs who wear different hats. And so another hat that I wear is I'm one of the principal investigators for the Center for Advancement of STEM Leadership, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. And that's, you know, just exactly what we are talking about here with hearing our voices, having our voices tell our story. And so with the research that we're doing, and it's a joint center, we're joint with North Carolina A&T as well as with Fielding Graduate University and AAC&U. But really what we want to do is we want to see what it is that we have been doing at HBCUs to have achieved the successes that we have, that we always speak about, that roll off our tongue so easily. What is it, and especially through the eyes of leadership, Dr. Bonner, and higher education leadership, what is it that is truly that HBCU core that is resulting in this? And so, you know, Dr. Obiaman, I would say, no, you're not working with MIT. MIT is working with you. You know,
You're absolutely right.
You know, and it's a privilege for them to be working with you. And I think that's the way we need to be. We know what we're doing. We know it, and we also need to frame it in a different way and to make sure that we are the ones teaching about what we talk about with broadening participation. We know our excellent programs, and we know how excellent our students are, and others really can't touch us when it comes to the measures. So,
and you know, Dr. McKell, to your point, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Dr. Watson, when Dr. Simmons told me, you know, one of the things to ground your center would be I want you to look at getting a journal with an academic press. And I got a yes from Michigan State, I got a yes from Fordham, and got a yes from Penn State. And I just, all of them were great, but I just love the machine because Penn State had been doing it for so long. But it's interesting, they said to me, you know what, we have been wanting to do a journal focused on populations of color and diversity, and we've wanted to work with an HBCU. So Prairie View will be our first, so we're really excited about that. So who knew, you know, so there are many times there are opportunities out there that we can seize that we don't know about, but we have to step out there and put ourselves out there.
Yeah,
Right. And
go ahead,
sorry.
Dr. Smith, go ahead.
No, well, I think a part of this, which is so rich this evening, is that we're sharing this information. So Brian is right across the street, and oftentimes Spelman and Morehouse, you know, faculty don't talk to each other about what they're doing because, you know, Spelman has a Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And so you can imagine that my phone has been ringing off the hook because I've been doing training with different colleges, historically white colleges, around, and other white groups around racial healing and truth telling. And, you know, we take advantage of this moment because you can unapologetically talk to white people about racism and about what it is and how it is systemic and how it is structural. I'm a professor of sociology as well, but my area is criminology and criminal justice. And so we've also been talking about kind of the history of violence against Black bodies, you know, with policing of Black bodies over time. But again, Brian wouldn't know that because he and I don't talk, but certainly there are connections that we can make with the work that you're doing. Through the Mellon work that we do, not only are we producing future faculty members coming from UNCF undergraduate institutions, but we're doing training for faculty who teach at UNCF institutions. So Dr. Bonner, you know, we did something with publishers last summer. We had an institute for faculty members about publishing in academic presses. We've done international seminars, but everyone doesn't know that. That's the work that we do and the impact that we're having through the funding that is provided by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And so again, I think that it's very important for us to be able to share these stories, but also to see how our projects are complementary and they're not in competition. So we must begin to do that. We also, to your question about students, and that was the initial question, yes, Spelman has been very fortunate not to have to deal with declining enrollments. But what we do find is that, again, we are a historically Black women's college. And so the same students that we're recruiting, everybody else is recruiting them as well. And many institutions can give them full rides. And so again, that becomes a challenge. However, you know, we just received some funding to increase our scholarships full rides, but that's just a drop in the bucket. So yes, the students want to come, but oftentimes it becomes a decision that a family makes and says, Princeton's gonna pay you full ride, you're going to Princeton, even though, and certainly there's nothing wrong with going to Princeton. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there is only one Spelman experience. You know, there are a lot of good schools all over the country, but there's only one Spelman experience. And many times the parents are making difficult decisions because their daughters want to be there, or their sons want to be at Morehouse, or they want to go to Prairie View or any of these other institutions, but we cannot compete with the financial support that they're receiving at other schools. So yes, everybody wants to come, but can we afford to bring them to us? And that becomes a question. As I just want us to always stay focused on that. What kind of support do we need to make certain that we can continue the good work that we're doing as a collective of HBCUs? And so that's very important.
And at the same time, support faculty so that they can take the leaves that they need to write the books and do the scholarship.
And that's what we do through the Mellon programs. We provide faculty sabbaticals. We provide teaching and learning institutes. We're funding colleges now for online training. We provide for faculty development grants for faculty members who are teaching at UNCF schools who may not have enough travel dollars, or they need a research assistant. And we're also providing international experiences for them to advance their scholarship within a global context. So those are the things we're trying to address, the needs that we know that many of our institutions cannot meet. So the UNCF Mellon programs provide those opportunities.
We've got some time for some questions, and we've got a number that have come in. So let me get to one. We have a question saying, what are some things that African-American professionals that work at PWIs can do to be supportive of faculty and students at HBCUs? Dr. McCall, you want to take that one and then we can work our way around?
Sure, I can take that one because a lot of us, though we offer a lot of great programs, I think having our students have external to our campus experience is also important. Often our students have those external experiences during the summer, it might be for a semester, etc. But as I said in my opening statement, we know the safe space that we provide. And though our students might want to go everywhere, there are some places where we frankly will not want to send them. And I think if we know that we're sending them, or if they are choosing, because we're not sending, of course, our students choose. But if we know that there is a place where there is going to be at least one person that student, if they run into something, can run to, I think that's a kind of partnership, and that's one way that they can help. And they can help by expecting as much or more for students than they expect of anyone else. Because the one thing we do not want is for students to go and feel as though they are being done a favor because we know we provide quality. And so we want that same quality for our students when they leave us and go into other spaces.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to tackle that question?
Or they could come and spend time at an HBCU and experience the quality of education that we're giving our students here. Who knows, they may end up wanting to join the HBCU.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm looking to, as we reimagine the work that we're doing with the UNCF Mellon programs, one of the programs that I'd like to add to our suite of offerings is a postdoc program. I don't know if we'll be able to fund it, but I'm very much interested in having a postdoc program for young faculty members who are part of the Mellon network. I said the UNCF has produced 125, but there are 125 among a total of 800 that have come from Mellon programs. And I would love to be able to find a way for some of those young faculty members to do postdocs at some of our institutions to gain exposure to the campuses. So I think that is certainly something that we can consider. The other question that I'm pondering on, and Fred, we could probably talk about this later, but I do want to get the stories of our faculty, our young faculty members who are educated at HBCUs and now are teaching at PWIs. I really want to see how they are mirroring that experience that they gained in the HBCU network. Are they trying to recreate those experiences? And so that's something that we're working with our UNCF PhDs. That's something that we will be working with them on, and gathering their stories to say, is this a replicable experience that you can transport to a PWI? Because clearly they are needed at PWIs as well.
Yeah. We have a question actually for you, Dr. Spence. This is from Dr. Patrice Prince, who asks, are you aware of any programs or resources that UNCF Mellon has in place to assist with, I imagine she's asking online pedagogy and
Yeah.
that.
We just funded, actually Spelman College, and I'm always careful that I'm not biased, but we did just fund Spelman College to run some online training programs. And the caveat is any institution that we provide funds to, they must invite faculty from other institutions. So that particular training, they will have Atlanta University Center faculty members involved in the training. Clark Atlanta is also an institution that's being considered for some funding. I'm just talking with them, but I am very much concerned about our institutions, and probably will be just doing some reaching out because our deadlines passed some time ago. But because we have additional funds, we are looking to see how we can assist some of our institutions in with the online training platform, because that is going to be the new normal.
Absolutely. A question for you, Dr. Marks. Are you experiencing any resistance in terms of the training from police officers? You know, as you're doing this implicit bias training, are you facing any resistance at all?
Not real. Well, resistance. All right. Just to give you some context about police, in my experience and what I've heard pretty consistently, many police officers don't necessarily look forward to training, regardless of the topic. So I walk into a training, it's 100 cops there, they don't want to be there anyway, they'd rather be on the street, and their training is mandatory. They have to show up, okay? Yeah. Now, some of them don't want to be there, and then the topic is implicit bias. So wait a minute, I don't want to be here, and then you call me racist? So yes, I come in there, and some of them like this, huffing and puffing, that sort of thing, giving me the face, you know, grimacing, some of them, all right? But our approach, really, here's the thing. The thing that ties me as a scientist and law enforcement officers, we both believe in the power of evidence. So our presentations are science and evidence-based. And I just beat them over the head with the science. Study, study, study. I mean, it's fun and entertainment. We do polling and it's all of that. But I do challenge them. But the science is very difficult to deny. And it's overwhelming. And so it gets to a point where the arms become unfolded and they start to sit up and pay attention. Especially when I tell them that mastering this content can bring, because a lot of cops, they just want to get home at night. If you understand how implicit bias works, or explicit bias for that matter, you're actually safer on the street. We tie it to their motivation, okay? But we also don't let them off the hook, right? So for example, I mean, all right, you gotta bear with me, I'm a professor. So I'm gonna do another screen share real quick, just to give you a sense of how we approach this work, right? So for example, we'll do something like, actually, let me show this one. We'll do something like, let me show you this real quick. Yeah, okay. So I'll ask some questions like this, check this out, right? I'll say, this is an actual question that we ask in the training. What percentage of fatal police shootings of civilians in the US do you believe are unjustified? We ask them that in the training, live polling, right? 0, less than 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over 5%, right? We ask them this. This next slide is pretty typical in terms of results, right? So usually there's some cops that will say literally 0. And I'll point out, I'll say, so really, out of 100 officers here, there's 2 that literally believe there is no such thing as a bad shooting, right? Everybody just pay attention, right? Because even most cops will say, come on, I mean, no, there's 850,000 police officers. All of them are not perfect, right? So you see 59% less than 1, 10, 14, 10, 2, and 4, okay? You see a distribution, okay? So in real time, they're seeing the diversity of thought within policing. The beauty of the polling is it's anonymous, but many cops think all other cops think like them, and they don't. The data don't support that, right? So it's hard for them all to push back when other cops in the room with them don't agree with them. And then we say, of the 900,000 or so police officers across 18,000 departments in the United States, I would vouch for the judgment, training, and character of what percentage of them? These are real questions we ask in real trainings. Options, 100%, 95, you see the responses here. The next slide, pretty typical, right? You have 6%, because the top 3 reasons that explain bad shootings, right? Unarmed Black folks and that sort of thing are judgment, training, or character, racism, that sort of thing. Those are the top 3 reasons. There's 18,000 police departments, 900,000 officers. Some of these cops will vouch for 800,000 people from a distance, right? But they're in the minority. What do you see in the majority, right? When you look down here, oh, don't tell me I'm stuck. Oh no, I'm frozen. Okay, you can still hear me, you can still see the screen. So at the bottom, less than 70%, it's 47% of folks saying that. So you see the distribution here. So in our trainings, we try to have real conversations with cops. We take the evidence from them. Remember, we ask them a question, they respond. Once they respond, that's data. The data's on the screen. I respond to the data, right? I'm not making this up. I don't give this to them. I give them the data and they will react to it. And it becomes very difficult for them to push back when they're providing the data that demonstrates everybody doesn't think the same. And you got 47% saying they trust less than 70% training, judgment, character of officers in the US. So we have those conversations and you hit them with the data and the empathy and the science. It's hard for them to push back. Some still will, some are just not ready, but others can be a bit open, more open to it than normal, okay? So I know you can still hear me. I'm gonna have to log out and jump back in because my screen froze, but you can, but thanks for the question. I'll be right back.
So we have one additional question, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up. This has been such a wonderful discussion. And I want this question to go to Dr. McHale. How are you ensuring that every student will have access to computers or electronic devices during this pandemic? Is that a challenge for you all?
That is a challenge, and even Reverend Al had spoken to some. It's more than just even the computers, it's internet access for some, or if you don't have enough internet access at home, you might have some, but other people are on it. And so what we did, at least when the pandemic started and also for the summer, we polled our students, we asked them who had what, and then we provided for computers for students who did not have, and we provided for hotspots for students who were having challenges with regard to internet. And so we try to work with each student. We're small enough that we can. We have over 2,000 students, but we really try to meet each student and try to try to help them. It is difficult because if you can meet each student, but for a faculty member with 30 students or a number of students in their classroom, it's hard for the faculty member to meet that student. So the institution needs to try and level the playing field for the students so that we can also be supportive of the faculty who are being asked to teach in a completely different way.
Thank you. This was such a wonderful discussion. I really learned a lot. I want to thank Dr. Bonner for your vision and your leadership in bringing us all together. I think what is clear is that we need more of these kinds of conversations. And hopefully this is just the beginning, Doc, of us having these ongoing conversations to talk about the issues that impact our institutions. So I want to turn it back over to you.
Yes, Jamal, I just want to say thank you for everything. And this is to be continued. And I appreciate my wonderful colleagues, my wonderful friends here. So we've got to create the synergy. And it seems like we have a lot of seamless connections that we can make and that we will make after this. So I just wanted to say thank you again. And that concludes our day. So please, please, please reach out to us. We're going to we'll analyze the chat information, and we also have some resources that we want to share with you at a later time. So we have your email addresses. So please feel free, contact us individually, contact us collectively, and we look forward to further engagements.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. This was
Thanks,
great.
Jamal. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.